The text arrived as I was helping a customer at my boutique. I'm leaving you and moving to Miami with my 20-year-old girlfriend. I've already emptied our joint account, haha. My hands remained steady as I read it. My voice didn't falter as I assisted Mrs. Peterson in selecting a scarf. The only outward sign that my husband of 12 years had just detonated our marriage via text was a slight tightening around my eyes. I waited until Mrs. Peterson left, her purchase elegantly wrapped in our signature silver paper, before typing my reply, "Good luck." My name is Claire, and at 38, I had just received the most callous goodbye in history. But while Mark was likely reveling in his grand exit, picturing me in tears over his betrayal, I was calmly locking up my boutique for the day. The warning signs had been present for months: the late nights at work that never correlated with his pay deposits, the sudden password changes on his phone, the way he'd begun frequenting the gym religiously, buying new clothes, attempting to recapture his youth. 3 months prior, I'd discovered a receipt for a dinner for two at an upscale restaurant on a night he'd claimed to be working late. That same evening, I'd opened a separate bank account at a different institution. A week later, when he suggested merging our accounts for simplicity, I'd cheerfully agreed while transferring my personal savings to the new account. The joint account he'd just emptied contained just enough to prevent him from becoming suspicious, about 2 months' worth of regular deposits. The rest was safely tucked away, along with detailed records of every questionable transaction he'd made over the past year. My phone buzzed again. "Don't bother begging. Melissa and I leave tomorrow. I'll send for my things later." Melissa, the new receptionist at his office. I'd met her at the company Christmas party, observed her laughing a little too enthusiastically at Mark's jokes, noticed the way she touched his arm when she thought no one was watching. She was young enough to be his daughter, naive enough to believe she was special. I didn't respond to his text. Instead, I called my lawyer, the one I'd consulted 2 months ago after finding the hotel charges on our credit card statement. "It's time," I said simply. "He just made his move." "The papers are ready," she replied. "I'll file them first thing tomorrow." "Do you want me to have him served in Miami?" "No rush. Let him think he's won. For now." Another text from Mark. "I know this must be hard for you. You're not getting any younger after all. At least you have your little shop to keep you busy." My little shop. The successful boutique I'd built from the ground up, the one that generated more income than his mid-level management position, the one whose profits I'd meticulously kept separate from our joint finances. I smiled, thinking of the certified letters that would await him in Miami. Let him enjoy his moment of triumph. I spent that evening in our house, my house, since I'd inherited it from my grandmother and kept it solely in my name despite Mark's repeated suggestions to add him to the deed. Another fortunate instinct that had paid off. While organizing the paperwork my lawyer would require, I stumbled upon our wedding album. Mark looked so different then, before his midlife crisis had transformed him into a caricature of his former self. These days, he wore shirts too tight for his softening middle, tried too hard to connect with the 20-somethings at his office, used slang that sounded ridiculous coming from a 45-year-old man. My phone continued buzzing with texts from him, each one more condescending than the last. "I've been planning this for months. Melissa understands me in ways you never could. You'll be fine. Maybe you'll find someone more your own age. Already told my family. They agree we grew apart. It's nobody's fault, really." I screenshotted each message, adding them to my evidence folder. Let him dig his hole deeper. My lawyer would relish his casual admission of premeditation, his gleeful announcement about emptying our account. The last text caught my attention. "BTW, I used the joint card to book our flights and hotel. Consider it my parting gift, LOL. Perfect." I called the credit card company. "Mrs. Harrison speaking. I need to report fraudulent charges and cancel a card immediately." "Certainly, ma'am. Can you identify the charges?" 2 first-class tickets to Miami booked today, hotel charges at the Royal Palm. "And I'll need to remove my husband as an authorized user. Do you have documentation of the fraud?" Text messages from my husband admitting he used our joint card to book travel with his girlfriend after emptying our bank account. "I'll be happy to forward them." The representative's professional tone couldn't quite mask her satisfaction as she canceled the charges. Mark and Melissa would arrive at the airport tomorrow to discover their tickets invalidated, their hotel reservation canceled. My phone buzzed again. don't worry about the house. I'll let you stay there until you find something smaller." I actually laughed out loud at that one. Did he genuinely believe he had any claim to my grandmother's house? Had his ego inflated so much that he'd forgotten whose name was on the deed? Another buzz. "And I know the shop means a lot to you. We can work out a fair payment for your half." My half? Of my business that I single-handedly built and financed my boutique, all while enduring Mark's complaints about my dedication, which he dismissed as a mere hobby. One evening, as he grumbled, I poured myself a glass of excellent wine, the kind I'd been saving for a special occasion. This certainly qualified. Tomorrow, Mark was in for a rude awakening about property law and the concept of separate assets. Tonight, however, I would savor the peace and strategize my next move. Morning arrived with a barrage of increasingly irate texts from Mark. "What the heck did you do to our credit card? The airline won't honor our tickets. The hotel canceled our reservation. Answer me." I silenced my phone and headed to my shop. Fridays were always our busiest, and I had a new consignment of designer handbags to unpack. Life goes on, even when your husband elopes with a receptionist young enough to be his daughter. Around noon, his mother called. "Claire, dear, Mark told us everything. About how controlling you've been, how you drove him away. He says you're being vindictive, causing trouble with his travel arrangements." I put her on speakerphone while I arranged a window display. "Did he mention draining our joint account and charging tickets for him and his new girlfriend on our credit card?" Silence. Then a hesitant, "Well, he said you left him no choice, that you'd been cold and distant." "Barbara," I said calmly, "I have his texts. Would you like me to read them aloud? The one where he boasts about taking our money? Or perhaps the one where he mocks my age?" Another pause. He did seem a bit cruel. I told him that text message was inappropriate. "I appreciate the call, Barbara. I've always liked you, but I think it's best if we end this conversation. My lawyer has advised minimal contact with Mark or his family during the proceedings." Proceedings. Already. Goodbye, Barbara. By late afternoon, Mark's sister Amanda was circulating family gossip through mutual acquaintances. Apparently, Mark and Melissa were stranded at a budget motel near the airport, their Miami aspirations temporarily grounded. He'd attempted to use his personal credit cards, but those had been maxed out for months, another red flag I'd noted. My lawyer called with an update. "The emergency hearing is set for Monday. Given his admission of emptying the joint account and the documented credit card fraud, we're in a strong position to freeze all remaining assets." "Has he been served yet?" "Not yet," I replied, "but he'll receive the papers at his new motel address." I added, "Speaking of which, his girlfriend's social media is providing excellent evidence. She's been posting about their adventure all day, including some choice comments about me." I smiled, thinking of my own meticulously compiled documentation. A year's worth of suspicious charges, hotel receipts, text messages that proved premeditation. Mark had been so preoccupied with his grand escape that he never considered I might be watching, waiting, preparing. My phone buzzed with another text. "You think you're so smart, but I made copies of all the boutique's financial records. Half that business is mine." I forwarded the message to my lawyer, adding it to the growing file of Mark's blunders. Let him learn the hard way about separate assets and business ownership. Sometimes the best revenge is simply being prepared. The emergency hearing on Monday unfolded precisely as I'd hoped. Mark arrived in his newly acquired youthful attire, designer jeans too tight for his age, a blazer that screamed midlife crisis. Melissa waited outside, her youth painfully apparent under the harsh courthouse lighting. My lawyer methodically presented our evidence. Mark's gloating text about draining our account, his credit card fraud, his documented history of hidden expenses, each piece meticulously gathered over months of quiet observation. "Your Honor," Mark's hastily retained lawyer began. "My client admits to some rash decisions, but Mrs. Harrison's actions have been vindictive and calculating." "Calculating?" my lawyer countered. "You mean prudent. My client protected her separate assets and maintained detailed records of her husband's suspicious behavior. That's not vindictive. That's smart business." The judge reviewed my documentation, the separate property deed to the house, the boutique's incorporation papers solely in my name, the careful segregation of business and personal finances that Mark had always criticized. "Mr. Harrison," the judge addressed Mark directly, "you admitted via text message to deliberately emptying a joint account and using shared credit cards to finance a trip with your girlfriend. Do you deny this?" Mark shifted uncomfortably. "I was just trying to make a clean break." "By committing financial fraud?" The judge raised an eyebrow. "And now you're claiming rights to property that documentation clearly shows is separate from marital assets?" "The business grew during our marriage," Mark's lawyer attempted. "My client is entitled to—" My lawyer interrupted. "The business was established before the marriage, and Mrs. Harrison maintained strict separation of business and personal finances throughout. We have documentation of every penny invested and earned." I watched Mark's face as reality began to sink in. He thought this would be easy: empty the accounts, run off with his girlfriend, and perhaps claim half of everything I'd built. He hadn't anticipated my preparedness. He never grasped my insistence on maintaining separate finances, scoffing at my meticulous bookkeeping as obsessive. Now, facing the consequences, he appeared bewildered. "The court finds sufficient evidence of financial misconduct," the judge declared. "All shared assets are frozen pending final dissolution. Mr. Harrison is ordered to return any funds removed from joint accounts within 24 hours. "But that money's gone," Mark protested. "We spent it on—" "Then I suggest you find a way to replace it," the judge interrupted sharply. "And, Mr. Harrison, the court takes a very dim view of using shared credit cards to finance escapades with paramours." Outside the courthouse, I heard Melissa questioning Mark about their Miami plans. His response was drowned out by the confident click of my heels on the marble floor as I returned to the business he'd never understood or valued. The following weeks witnessed a series of increasingly desperate maneuvers from Mark. He claimed the boutique had been his idea, insisted he'd invested money in its early stages, even suggested he'd been my business partner all along, claims swiftly debunked by my meticulous records. "He's getting desperate," my lawyer observed. "His girlfriend's social media indicates they're residing in her studio apartment now. Apparently, living on a receptionist's salary isn't the glamorous getaway he envisioned." Mark's family began reaching out, their tone a stark contrast to their initial accusations. "We had no idea," his sister Amanda confessed. "He told us you'd been cold, controlling, that he needed to escape. But then we saw his texts. The way he bragged about taking your money. That's not the brother I thought I knew." His mother called again, this time in tears. "The things he said about your age, about replacing you with someone younger. I raised him better than that. I thought I did. I let their calls go to voicemail. Their support might have meant something weeks ago, but now it felt like rats abandoning a sinking ship." Ironically, the boutique flourished, fueled by local gossip surrounding my situation. Women began patronizing the store specifically to demonstrate their support, often purchasing far more than they'd intended. "My ex tried something similar," one customer confided while buying a designer handbag. "Thought he'd take everything in the divorce. Men like that never expect us to be smarter than them." My phone still buzzed occasionally with texts from Mark, his tone vacillating between anger and manipulation. "You've ruined everything. I never meant to hurt you. You'll regret being so vindictive. Can't we work something out? That business would be nothing without my support." I forwarded each message to my lawyer without reply, letting him dig himself deeper. Through the grapevine, I heard Melissa was having second thoughts. Sharing a studio apartment with a middle-aged man who couldn't afford his own place wasn't the romantic fantasy she'd envisioned. The age gap that had seemed thrilling during clandestine hotel rendezvous felt different in the harsh light of reality. She posted online about toxic relationships and learning from mistakes. Yesterday, my lawyer mentioned during an update call, Melissa removed her relationship status. This morning, I almost felt sorry for Mark. Almost. But then I recalled his heartless ha-ha after informing me he'd emptied our account, the casual cruelty of his remarks about my age, the way he'd assumed I'd be helpless without him. Instead of pity, I felt something else: pride. Pride in my foresight, my quiet strength, my ability to safeguard myself while he underestimated me. The final divorce hearing bore little resemblance to Mark's imagined triumph. His cocky demeanor was gone, replaced by barely concealed panic. Melissa was conspicuously absent, having moved on to a co-worker her own age, according to office gossip. Mark appeared in his old clothes, the designer wardrobe apparently returned to help replenish the joint account he'd plundered. His lawyer looked weary, likely from attempting to find loopholes in my documented asset separation. Your Honor, Mark's lawyer made one last attempt. Despite the separate property documentation, my client contributed to the growth of his wife's business through moral support and— Moral support? My lawyer interjected. Like these text messages belittling Mrs. Harrison's business as a little shop? Or these social media posts referring to it as her hobby? The judge had clearly heard enough. The final settlement reflected my meticulous planning. I retained my house, my business, and my separate assets. Mark received his personal belongings and his car, which was worth less than he owed on it. You've destroyed me, he hissed as we left the courthouse. I'll have to move back in with my parents. No, Mark, I replied calmly. You destroyed yourself. I just made sure you couldn't destroy me too. His mother was waiting outside, ready to drive him to her house, his new residence at 45. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The man who'd mocked my age was now living in his childhood bedroom, while I continued running my thriving business. You planned this all along, he accused. You knew this would happen. No, I said, I just paid attention and prepared. Unlike you, I responded evenly, I understood the importance of maintaining accurate records. His mother stepped between us. That's enough, Mark. You've embarrassed yourself quite sufficiently. As they departed, I overheard her admonishing him. Honestly, what were you thinking? A 20-year-old? Emptying bank accounts? Sending those dreadful texts? I watched them disappear into the parking lot, feeling nothing but relief. Mark had believed he was writing the ending to our story with that cruel text. Instead, he'd merely initiated my carefully orchestrated plans. My phone buzzed, not with messages from Mark this time, but with notifications of new online orders for my boutique. Life was moving forward, just not in the direction he'd anticipated. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, my boutique expanded to a second location. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Mark struggled to reconstruct his life, the little shop he'd belittled was flourishing. I'd employed 3 new staff members and launched a website that was gaining national traction. News of Mark's predicament filtered back through mutual acquaintances. He'd tried dating apps but discovered women his age weren't interested in a middle-aged man living with his parents. Younger women, having learned of his history through office gossip, steered clear. Melissa had apparently cautioned her friends about him, sharing screenshots of his desperate attempts to reconcile after she'd ended things. His professional life had also suffered. The company's HR department initiated an investigation into his relationship with a subordinate, resulting in a formal reprimand. The anticipated promotion went to someone else, someone without a history of inappropriate relationships with reception staff. He tried to claim age discrimination, Amanda revealed during an unexpected visit to the boutique. Said they were punishing him for dating someone younger. HR simply added that complaint to his file. I was surprised to see his sister in my shop, but her presence spoke volumes about how completely Mark had alienated his own family. I know we didn't support you initially, she admitted, running her fingers over a silk scarf. He played the victim so convincingly. But seeing how he handled everything, how he behaved afterward, I'm ashamed we ever believed him. My lawyer kept me informed of Mark's ongoing attempts to contest the divorce settlement. Each petition was denied, his claims of unfair distribution dismissed based on the evidence of his own actions. He actually tried arguing that his text about emptying the account was just a joke, she told me, laughing. The judge asked if haha made theft less illegal. The boutique's success brought unexpected recognition. Local business magazines wanted to feature my story, not as a wronged wife, but as a shrewd businesswoman who'd protected her interests. Aspiring entrepreneurs sought advice on separating business and personal finances. The best protection is preparation, I advised one young woman who reminded me of Melissa. And always trust your instincts. Mark's mother called occasionally, usually after he'd engaged in some particularly self-destructive behavior. He'd tried online gambling, hoping for a quick financial fix. He'd gotten involved in a pyramid scheme promising rapid returns. Each attempt to recapture his former lifestyle only mired him deeper in trouble. "I don't know where we went wrong with him," she sighed during one call. "His father and I offered to help him get back on his feet if he'd just take responsibility for his actions. But he's still blaming everyone else. You, Melissa, his company, the judge." I listened politely but maintained my distance. Their family drama was no longer my concern. My life had progressed, filled with plans for a third boutique location and a potential expansion into luxury accessories. The only vestige of Mark's influence on my life was a framed screenshot hanging in my office, his final text before I blocked his number. "Have fun with your little shop. At least it'll keep you busy in your old age." Beneath it sat my latest business award, proof that sometimes the best revenge is simply succeeding on your own terms. 1 year after the divorce, I hosted a grand opening for my third boutique location. The event attracted local media, and the narrative they wanted to share wasn't about my failed marriage. It was about a successful businesswoman expanding her brand. Mark's betrayal had become a mere footnote in my success story. During the event, Melissa unexpectedly appeared. She looked younger than ever, or perhaps I simply felt that much stronger. She shifted uncomfortably, clutching her purse like a shield. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "I believed everything he told me, about how you were cold, controlling, how you didn't support his dreams. Then I watched him try those same manipulation tactics on me when things got difficult," I finished, resuming my arrangement of a display of designer sunglasses. "Those weren't his dreams, Melissa. They were escapes. There's a difference." "I know that now," she acknowledged, pausing before adding. "He tried to move in with me when you froze the accounts. Thought my studio apartment would be—" She trailed off, shaking her head. I simply nodded, offering a small, knowing smile. Some lessons are best learned firsthand. "A temporary stay," she clarified. "After 2 weeks of him complaining about the size of my closet and suggesting I take out a loan for a larger place, I understood what you meant about the difference between dreams and escapes." I actually laughed. "Let me guess," I said. "He had grand plans but no concrete way to finance them?" "Exactly," she confirmed. "Everything was going to magically work out once his investments paid off, once he received that promotion, once his cryptocurrency inevitably skyrocketed in value." She shook her head. "I'm dating someone my age now. We have student loans and a small apartment, but at least we're building something real." After she left, my assistant manager whispered, "Was that the girlfriend?" "No," I replied. "That was just another woman who learned the same lesson I did." Speaking of lessons, I gestured towards a young couple browsing our designer handbags. "Let's discuss your idea for expanding our accessories line." The boutique had become more than just a business. It was a symbol of independence, resilience, and the power of preparedness. Young entrepreneurs often sought my advice, and I always stressed the importance of protecting their assets. Mark's mother called one last time, not to discuss Mark, but to express her gratitude. "You taught our family a valuable lesson," she said, "about enabling bad behavior, about making excuses for cruelty. Mark is still living at home, still blaming everyone else for his problems, but we're no longer defending him. That's your legacy to our family, showing us the difference between supporting someone and enabling them." I reflected on that legacy as I reviewed plans for a fourth location. Mark had intended to diminish me, to replace me with a younger version, and seize half of everything I'd built. Instead, he'd inadvertently propelled me to become even stronger, more successful. My phone buzzed with a text from my lawyer. Mark filed another petition to revisit the settlement. Judge dismissed it immediately and ordered him to pay court costs. "Thought you'd enjoy that." I smiled, picturing him in his childhood bedroom, still attempting to rewrite an ending that had been determined the moment he underestimated me. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even, it's about getting better. 2 years after Mark's cruel text message, I received an invitation to speak at a women's business conference. The topic wasn't divorce or betrayal. It was about building and protecting a successful enterprise. My story had transformed from a cautionary tale into a source of inspiration. During the Q&A, a woman asked about separating business and personal finances. "My husband says I'm being paranoid," she explained. "That marriage means sharing everything." My ex-husband said the same thing, I replied, right up until he attempted to claim half of my business in our divorce. Trust your instincts. Protection isn't paranoia. The boutique chain had expanded to 5 locations, each more prosperous than the last. The little shop Mark had mocked now employed 30 people and had been featured in several national publications. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned Mark had finally moved out of his parents' house and into a small apartment above a garage. He'd been forced to accept a lower-paying job after his former company downsized, eliminating his position during restructuring. His dating profile still described him as young at heart, though his profile picture was clearly outdated. Ironically, Melissa had become a regular customer at my original boutique. She'd earned her business degree and launched her own social media consulting firm. "You inspired me," she confided one day, explaining how a woman can build something lasting rather than falling for empty promises. I kept Mark's cruel text message framed in my office, not as a reminder of pain, but as evidence of how far I'd come. Beneath it hung a sign: "Success is the best revenge." At the 5-year anniversary celebration of my original boutique, I stood addressing my employees and loyal customers. The space had been transformed from a single small shop into the flagship store of a thriving business empire. Mark's mother attended, though I hadn't sent her an invitation. She waited until the crowd thinned to approach me. "I saw Mark yesterday," she said, smoothing her designer dress, one she'd purchased from my store. "He was talking about his glory days, about the life he could have had. He still doesn't understand that he didn't lose everything in the divorce. He threw it away." I thought about that text message, his casual cruelty, his presumption that I would crumble without him, how he'd expected me to plead, to break, to prove him right about my desperation. Instead, I'd built something stronger than before. Each new boutique location was a testament to what women could achieve when they stopped dimming their light for insecure men. The young saleswoman I'd recently hired, coincidentally also named Melissa, approached with a question about the new inventory system I'd implemented. As I explained the process, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the store window. I saw what Mark had failed to see 5 years ago: not a woman growing older, but one becoming wiser, stronger, more successful. His cruel text message had been intended as an ending. Instead, it had been a beginning, not just for me, but for every woman who heard my story and realized she deserved better than someone else's midlife crisis.